Ocean conservation, dealing with climate change, these are all very deeply justice issues. If we think about who is impacted first and hardest by sea level rise, by pollution, by the loss of local food security, by storms, it's absolutely communities of color and poor communities along our coastlines who have all these experiences getting screwed over in the past. Why should they trust that a new solution would actually have their best interests at heart? There are so many examples of how it's gone wrong. There's the first Black incorporated town in the South, Princeville, is going to be the next place where we're having climate change refugees in the United States. They're native Alaskan villages that have to completely relocate because their land is no longer livable because the permafrost is melting. There's a town in Staten Island that had to completely relocate because they were hit by storms so many times. And they said, we will move if you promise this becomes a park and doesn't just get sold to developers to make a lot of money off of the loss of our community. There are some really hard conversations that need to be had to make sure that it's not just people who have a second home at the beach and great insurance that get to come through this okay.
The vulnerability of Black land isn't limited to the coastline.
It's actually now zoned urban fringe.
Urban fringe.
Urban fringe.
People try to buy it.
All the time.
Sandra's family were sharecroppers on this land. Her grandparents bought it in 1946 using money their son made serving in the military. But their will didn't clearly identify a single person who would inherit and manage the property.
When my grandmother passed away, it was left equally to her descendants. So that essentially created heirs property.
Heirs property.
It's fractional ownership. A property that could be owned by 200 people. Any one of those heirs could sell their percentage. That new owner can go to the court and say, well, we can't agree on how to manage this land.
And force the rest of the folk to sell it even if they don't want to?
Yes. And so it was essential for us to move it out of heirs property status. And in that process cost from probate to title clearing close to about $10,000.
Wait, so you own the land, but then you had to pay $10,000 to own the land again?
Exactly. Because of the cost. A lot of families don't clear title to their property. And so then it keeps them in a vulnerable economic risk position.
And $600 million might sound like a lot, but on the other, there was a lot of damage there as well. How are residents of Flint reacting this morning?
Although the state claims that Flint's water quality has met federal standards for 3 years now, many residents tell us they don't trust officials and they still don't trust the water. One person told us yesterday that no amount of money can heal the suffering of those impacted by this crisis, and the coronavirus pandemic is just making their situation worse.
When and how did trying to prevent the apocalypse become your day job?
I'm Black, which apocalypse? I'm Black, which Black, which Black, which Black, which Black, which Black.
Running out of time, running out of time, running out of time, running out of time to make you love me. Running out of time, running out of time. Always spin my head around. I've been looking for it. I've been running out of spells to make you love me. Secrets. To make you love me. I wade in your water. Your waves wash over me. I drift to the deep end. Don't say, don't say, don't say. It's a low tide. I'm fine. I found peace in drowning. Keep it a $1.50, fuck all. Living and pretend.
The hidden heroes on the front lines of California's raging climate-fueled wildfires, prisoner firefighters. 1,500 of the 9,400 firefighters battling fires in California are incarcerated. They make $1 an hour, but are rarely eligible to get jobs as firefighters after their release. According to some estimates, California saves up to $100 million a year by using prison labor to fight its biggest environmental problem. Incarcerated firefighters live in 44 low-security field camps throughout California, including 3 camps for women prisoners and 1 for juvenile detainees.
I would ask people to recognize that the folks who are currently in fire camp have already been deemed and are currently working as public servants to the state of California.
Leadership needs to sit down and really restructure this program, and we need to figure out how do we expand the firefighters in California while not perpetuating a system of slave labor.
If you only ever see racist people or racism presented as being perpetuated by Klansmen or like really overtly violent people, then you're never going to be able to see how you perpetuate that. Like, I really genuinely believe that like if we live in a racist system, if we live in a system where white people benefit off the oppression of people of colour, Black Indigenous people of colour, then unless in genuinely every breath and every movement and everything that you do, you are actively resisting racism, I think that everyone is racist to some extent.
A lot of like the good white person like narrative is kind of like, it's easier either to protect yourself from like, of course that's not me, or the, like this almost like a self-loathing part of like, and like almost like shame and guilt, but also that is also not helping towards justice.
Yeah.
Like none of the narratives around that are actually a driving force of action of anti-racism work, and like upholding this like being more concerned around how you are seen as a racist rather than if you're actually a racist.
After slavery was abolished, white cattle farmers had to hire these skilled African Americans because, as we'll see, along with the Mexican vaqueros, they were some of the best cattle ranchers in the country.
During the slave era, they were brought here for their herdsmanship. The herdsmen worked their cattle with dogs, sticks, and rocks, and whistling and sounds. And that combination of those two people put together made the expert horseman. And every third cowboy back in that era was of either Spanish, Indian, or some African descent.
That's why they call cowboys. Back in those days, a white man would call you a boy, even if you like 100 years older than him. That's what he would call you a boy. So that's why this cowboy come in there. And also the black cowboy, they'd be out on the range. We would do all the work. Whatever's supposed to be done out on the range, well, the black cowboy would do it.
By myself in the woods, just the sound of the distant water in Erica Badu. Just the sound, just a word. The vibrations ascending, baby, they're not good. Just a scent, ooh, just a smell, ooh, just a feeling. Ooh, I can't help it now. Creativity in my veins. The multiplicity, it speaks to me in my brain. Nothing else but the sound of water in Erica Badu. Just a taste, just a taste, just a peek at the higher state of being.
When Charles Fraser speaks, it is with conviction and fervor.
Development essentially means providing houses for people who've got to have a house. Now, how we do that is the issue. Do we do it in a responsible fashion that looks 5 years ahead, that looks 20 years ahead? Now, in coastal development, for recreation areas and retirement areas, development here means keeping out ugliness that seems to follow the flow of traffic.
The development of nearby Hilton Head Island has changed the face of the South Carolina coast probably for all time. When a brash young law student named Charles Fraser visited this remote and beautiful place in the 1950s, its few inhabitants were people not unlike the family of Leroy Brown, living off what they could farm and get from the sea. As he contemplated this landscape, Fraser envisioned houses, streets, marinas, golf courses, a complete city blended into the land and water. His concept was ridiculed by many, but today Charles Fraser has proven his idea many times over.
Okay.
His way of doing business may seem informal, But Charles Fraser knows how to put a deal together.
Phase one will carry Arrowwood across the road, make a curve, put in the golf course, put in the chapel, put in the polo fields, and we'll have available...
As you know, I'm specifically interested in that 16 or 17 acre commercial tract.
And fortunately, I have other excellent people who are interested in it as well, and I hope you will pay as much as they'll pay, because if you will, then I'd love to have you as the buyer.
Hilton Head, by now over 25 years old, remains the benchmark by which all subsequent development has been measured. Indeed, the style which Charles Fraser created has been imitated up and down the coast of the United States and influenced a generation of land development. So a great question looms on the South Carolina coast: how to create what is needed without destroying that which cannot be replaced.
million people depend on the integrity of the Missouri River. We have a pipeline made at the cheapest cost possible because this is what capitalism does. This oil that is now flowing through our homelands illegally could destroy the entire river forever, or for how long, we don't know.
But when you actually look at per capita emissions, it's actually in 6 days. Someone in the UK has the same carbon footprint as someone in Rwanda for a year. And in China, where everyone always talks about China being the problem, they're actually 12th when you look at per capita emissions. And it's Australia and the US and all those countries that are at the top. But no one's ever saying that Australia and the US should have population control measures.
But also, like, you know, for example, the UK almost, like, produces almost nothing in their own country, but has put all of their production, like, factories and everything to countries that are in the traditional, like, global south, for example, China. So all of those emissions are not calculated for the UK's emissions. So when you look at the emission curve, for example, from the UK, there is, like, in recent years, actually a little curve going down because it only measures direct emissions and it doesn't include aviation and other, for example, like all production measures, which is now shipped off to China. So it's completely, I mean, beyond racist and eco-fascist.
These properties. They raise families on these properties. Mr. Tuggle, he ain't gonna build nothing on it. It's all for the timber. All for the timber. Far as you can see on all these hills, this is fresh cut. I mean, right after he purchased, he went to cutting. It was in the family for 125 years. All of this. All of this. My aunts and uncles' houses sat up on the top up here. You can see that it's been wiped clean of pine. And everything that you see pushed up, they're gonna come back and burn it and then replant. This is important that you stick together, you keep your interests together, you hold tight to your interests. And if you plan on doing anything with your interests, make sure you do it in the family. Keep it in the family. That's where we fell short.
I'm in over my head. I don't think of you as bits and pieces. I think of you only like a miracle. Loving so deeply, I feel it throughout my past lives. It feels good. I'm never saying goodbye. It feels good. I'm never saying goodbye. I'm in over my head. Over my head. I'm in over my head. Over my head. Signs, they explain it to me. There's no joy I can take with knowing what's waiting here for now, but not for long. Where will my mind slip away? Explain that to me. I'm in over my head. Loving so deeply, I'm in over my head. I'm in over my head. Loving so deeply, I'm in over my head. I'm in over my head. Loving so deeply, 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 I'm in over my head.
Now, what happens when you take that sense of adventure and you pair it with social responsibility? That's when sparks fly.
I actually think there is scientific support for thinking about climate change not as this isolated issue, because you can't care about climate change or the economy. You can't care about climate change or equity. If you care about equity, you have to care about climate change. If you care about jobs, you have to care about climate change. And I think that's something that the science does really support.
I've never needed hope to do the work that I do. The idea that like now climate change would make me very fearful in a way that like I'm already afraid when I drive cross country. I'm afraid when I see a cop. I'm afraid when my husband is away from me, right? Navigating this world as a black man. Like I'm a black woman, so like this has never been my first existential crisis. I can't say that it's like something that really changes the trajectory of my life. We are shocking a lot of systems. I mean, at the very core, we're saying that like neoliberalism is not a a paradigm that's going to save us, serve us, or bring us forward, right? A lot of people's lives and livelihoods are based on them succeeding in a particular framework, in a particular paradigm. And this is asking them to not only share power, but to give up power, right? And it's asking us to think about a new future that is beautiful, but also way more collective, right? Way less atomized, way more invested in the health and well-being of one another. There is an unspoken tension about who gets to decide the direction of this country, who gets to speak, and whose voices are taken seriously.
Where do we put our sorrow? Where do we reconcile our history? And where do we reconnect with our heritage?